Hi, I'm John Kursky, and in part 2 of making you an AI-enabled Power BI developer, I'm going to show you how to set up a Power BI project file in Review GitHub Copilot. Now, before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new features we'll be releasing with Power Query Lint. Now, in our last video, we set up Visual Studio Code, we set up Git repo. Now, let's discuss Power BI project file. Power BI project file is a new format, or relatively new format, that takes our traditional PBIX file and saves all the components around the semantic model and the report into plain text. And plain text is really necessary for Git, but also really necessary for AI to be able to make updates to. So up on my screen here, I've got a Power BI project file, I've got a Power BI traditional PBIX file. Now, if you haven't used PBIP before, the first thing you're going to need to do is go to Options and Settings. And we're going to turn on a preview feature. Now, as of January 2026, this is still in preview. I use it explicitly on projects because if I can save that content to Git, I'm willing to take some of that risk on preview features because it has saved me to be able to roll back changes instead of keeping 100 versions of PBIX files that I have to open and try to understand what's changed. PBIP, I've been using on projects for a while now. So if you click those boxes, we want to save it in PBIP, in the TIMDL format, in the report in PBIR format. One of the things you're going to need to do is you'll hit OK. Now, if this is the first time you're saving that, you're going to have to close Power BI Desktop and then open it back up in order for that feature to be available. I also mentioned you probably want to be on a recent version of Power BI Desktop, something in the last couple of months, in order to take advantage of this and follow along with this demonstration. If I go to Save As now, I'm going to go Browse, and I want to save it to the repository I set up in our last video. Notice I've got a couple other options now. I want to save this as the Power BI project file. I'm going to hit Save. And if I pull up Visual Studio Code, now I've left it from our last video open. You'll notice that I've got a couple of green items here. Now, this is looking at it from the perspective of Git. Green means created, orange means, or amber means modified, red means deleted. So we only have the README file here. This has now created the structure of the Power BI report that we have open in plain text. It's broken down by the report content, so those are your visuals, your semantic model, so that is the Power Query and the DAX measures. We'll talk about git ignore here in a second, and then a PBIP file. Now the PBIP file, I'm going to click on that, is just a JSON file that is a pointer to working with the report. And that is important to know. If you never see the PBIP file, or it goes missing if you're using a feature like Git integration, you can always go to this definition.pbir file in File Explorer, double click, and it will open up the file in Power BI Desktop. Now, the PBIP file is important when you save it, but not necessarily you're going to need it from a version control standpoint. The definition.pbir is the file that will actually open and point to the semantic model for it, say, hey, open this report, and the local data set or the local semantic model reference is here. And so that's how it actually opens that up. The by path is what is pointing to the local or relative path of the semantic model definition. And it's important to note that if you're using like a thin report, that's going to actually get changed to something like by connection and point to your Power BI service, or where your semantic model is located in the Power BI service. Now I'm going to click on the git ignore file here, and important to identify, there is a couple settings here that git ignore says, hey, don't commit this to source control. And one of the most important ones here is the cache.abf file. I would recommend not editing this, keep this in place. What that is, the ABF file, is the actual data. So when we go to commit to source control, we're telling Git, don't include the data, just the structure. Now, from a security perspective, that is really helpful. It doesn't absolve you of making sure that your repository has the right permissions on it, but it mitigates some of that risk. So if you're a Power BI project lead and maybe you're using RLS and you have access to more data than maybe some of the other developers, the fact that the contents are going into the repository, when they open up the file, they have to refresh the file on their side. It's going to use their credentials, and so they're only going to see the data they have access to. Now, other note, if you use on the report side, you have filters that have stuff like credit card numbers or social security numbers, like if you're in the US, or sensitive data, that is going to get stored hard-coded in the JSON, which I'll show you here in a second, from a report perspective. So again, this doesn't eliminate the fact that you need to manage it from the repository from security, but we're mitigating the risk. All right, so if I open up the report here from a definition standpoint, you're going to see there's JSON representation of this report. So each kind of page, each report section has visuals, each visuals has its folder, and then there's a representation of that file. So this is a line chart, it's using the date dimension. It's not necessarily easy to read, but I kind of equate it to like looking at the Matrix, and I know that's dating me as somebody who was alive when that came out. This is you get kind of used to it, and the nice thing is with version control, you can actually make changes, see what changes. So if I move it, the XY axis gets changed, or if I change the X axis on the line chart, I'll see the field change right here. So you'll get used to it after a while, but this is really important because not only is version control able to understand the changes because it can look at it from plain text, but AI is going to be able to make modifications to it because it will review this, understand its JSON, and make changes. Now I'm going to close the file here and then open up the semantic model, and you'll notice that we've got definitions of the tables, and this is using the tabular model definition language. And this is a kind of a tab delimited, or kind of resembles yet another markup language, but it's its own definition language, tab delimited, a lot easier to read because I can see here's all my columns, here's the format, here's the data type, and then there's a section here for the Power Query that is being used to generate this table. So this is really important for not only version control, because if I change a step, or if I update or if I ask AI to add some comments, this gets changed and I can see what gets changed. Now it's important to note that if I make changes here in this text file, if I have Power BI Desktop open, as of January 2026, this does not get reflected immediately in the Power BI Desktop file. Other notes here is if I make a change in the semantic model in Power BI Desktop, so I'm going to open this up, and let's say on alignment dim, just retry, pull this data in, and I do a sort, and I hit apply. Let me save that. That gets added. So you have to save the file in order for these changes to be reflected in if you have Visual Studio Code up. It's important to note that just because you make a change somewhere doesn't mean that it automatically reflects on the other application. Okay, so at this point, I've got a bunch of these files from the source control. I want to do an initial commit. I'm going to hit the commit button. And then remember, you commit locally, sync globally. And if I go to the browser, hit refresh, you'll now see the reports are located here. So I've got this in version control now, and I have it backed up. All right, so now let's switch gears. I've got the Power BI project file set up. Now, how do I get AI to interact with these files? Well, there's some prerequisites here. And this is the part where we start looking at more of the paid components. It's GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot's a wonderful tool. I use it on a lot of my projects. And the way that you start out with it is in Visual Studio, there's an extensions feature. And what I like to do is you're going to want to install the GitHub Copilot here in the GitHub Copilot chat. And that is going to install the chat features that you're going to leverage when interacting with the code that I have up on the screen. Now, once you have those loaded, you're going to get a chat feature or a toggle chat button up at the top right here. But it's important to note that you're going to need to make sure you've got your subscription set up correctly. So if you haven't signed up for GitHub Copilot, I'll put these links in the description. There is individual plans. You can start out for free. You can pay for a pro user, the Pro Plus, and then we got for businesses. Now, I'm going to take a quick aside here. If you're going to use the free tier or pro tier, make sure you kind of understand what data you're working with. Use maybe kind of test data or publicly available data. I wouldn't recommend using your business data. If you're going to use GitHub Copilot and you want the data privacy settings and everything, work with the organization to have the for business setup. There's a different kind of privacy policy for that in terms of how they train the data, if you're require GDPR. Obviously, this isn't legal advice, but just from my understanding on how to use this from a security perspective, you need to keep this in mind. There is a cost. You can at least start out for free. And if you're using the free version, you'll have access to certain models. At the time of this video, those are the models that are available. With the way that the industry is going, I'm sure that's going to change, maybe even by the time you're watching this video. Once you sign up for that subscription, in GitHub Copilot, in the chat, there's usually an indication you need to sign in with your GitHub account. So you're going to sign in with your GitHub account, and at this point, you're going to have your agent on here, and there's a couple settings I want to point out when you're working with the agent. You're going to get this setting right here. This is the kind of the mode that you're going to work with the agent. And if you've got a recent version of Visual Studio Code and those extensions, you're going to have 4 at the time of this taping. So we've got the one I have open up is agent mode, which is the one that we'll talk about maybe even more in depth in our next video. This is the one that's going to take advantage of MCP, Model Context Protocol, and other kind of external factors when it needs to make changes. There's the ask feature, in which maybe you want to ask a question to GitHub Copilot, but you don't want it to make any edits to your content. There is then the edit feature. The edit feature is, all right, I'm going to ask it to make changes, and it's going to make changes to the document. And then one of the newer features I like is the plan feature. It's essentially like agent in read-only mode. I want to tell it to do something, but tell me what it's going to do, and then I can say start implementation, and then it will carry out those changes. So let me just give you a kind of a simple example here on using the agent mode. I've got the alignment dim Tyndall file open, and you can see the context that it's running in right here, that it's looking at that particular line of code that I've highlighted. Well, I can actually tell it or highlight those lines of code, and I've got a prompt which I'll share in the description or a link to it. And if I paste that in, this is just a prompt in which I want to add some comments to my code. And if I put this in, what it's going to do now, now I've got this in agent mode. It's going to check if there's any extensions it wants to use. I could switch this to edit mode if I don't want to use any agents. And we'll talk a little bit more about agents here in a second. And I've got it running on GPT 4.1, which is kind of the free version of it. There is other models available depending on what you are paying for. So you'll notice that if you're on maybe the free tiers, it might be a little slower. Obviously, you're paying. When you're paying, you'll have access to maybe some of the models that you want that might be a little quicker. But I wanted to kind of keep it in the freer area. You'll notice now it says what it did, and with the chat mode, it actually shows me if I want to keep the changes or undo them. Now, this isn't related to Git at this point. But this is the kind of GitHub Copilot and chat feature telling me, hey, I made these changes, red indicating there's been some deletions, and then I went ahead and added comments and moved the code over. So I can actually keep that if I want to. If I keep it and I save the file, I now have automatically added comments to my code, and I can see those changes reflected as well. Now, if I'm at the point and I'm looking at this and I'm like, or maybe I even close Power BI Desktop, open it up, and I don't like what happened to the alignment dim and I need to roll it back, even before I commit, I can actually right-click and discard the changes and roll back those changes. So the agent or the chat feature that we have here, coupled with Visual Studio Code and Git, gives me the ability to roll back even locally, or even later on, how to roll back once I've committed a change, and maybe I need to make that roll back that change because I'm not necessarily happy with what has happened with asking AI to do it. So you've kind of given yourself that safety net with version control that now if I'm interfacing with the chat feature to update my code, it will do that. All right, so I hope you learned something today. In this video, I covered how to set up the Power BI project file, briefly went over the GitHub Copilot chat feature in Visual Studio Code and how to interact with it in order to make updates to your Power BI file. And in our next video, we're going to take a deeper dive into agents and specifically in GitHub Copilot. So stay tuned. We'll have our video out shortly. And in the meantime, thank you for your time.